Inventory Management, Part 1. In this lesson, we will study what inventory is, what are the reasons for keeping inventory, and then we'll study some models to calculate various parameters for inventory management. What is inventory? Now, for this lesson, inventory is a stock of materials used to satisfy customer demand or to support production of goods or services. So if you go to a Subway, they have some vegetables, salads, bread, other ingredients they're going to use to produce orders for their customers. All of those things are inventory. If you go to a factory, you'll see various parts, components, maybe even raw materials like steel, aluminum. All of those are inventory. If you go to a retail store like Walmart or Target, you see items on the shelves waiting to be bought. Those are inventory. Inventory in its broadest sense is anything that is waiting to be processed or bought, right? In that sense, in the broadest sense of the word, customers waiting to be served can also be thought of as inventory. In this lesson, however, we're only talking about inventory which is which does not include customers. So it is, it could be raw materials, it could be components, it could be finished goods, all these things which are either waiting for their processing to be used as part of goods or services, or they are finished goods waiting to be sold. Inventory management is the planning and controlling of such inventories. Most organizations will have some inventory. Now, when we start talking about inventory in this part 1, we are going to talk about a lot size or a batch size, or sometimes called an order quantity. And all these terms refer to a quantity of inventory that moves in the system or that is produced in one go. So let's say you order from your supplier a certain component in the thousands. So each month you order, let's say 5,000 of that component. Because you're ordering in batches of 5,000, or lots as sometimes another word for batches of 5,000, that is your order quantity, that is your lot size, that is your batch size. Often inventory is moved in units greater than 1, especially between companies. So a supplier will produce a whole batch of things and send them over, right? So that is why it is useful to talk about the lot size or the batch size or the order quantity when we talk about inventory management. Now, you can think of inventory as water in a container. If you look at this picture, there is water coming in. That is the inflow to the inventory pile or the inventory stock. Okay. As the inflow happens, more inventory is added to this storage. Then there's some outflow because you're probably doing something with the inventory, using it in further processing or selling it, right? And then some inventory may get lost or scrapped or damaged that you have to kind of throw out. So there might be some small outflow based on that. The balance of the inflows and the outflows will determine whether inventory increases or decreases and what level of inventory is maintained. So while there's always stuff moving in the system, some things are coming in, some things are going out, there's also an amount of inventory in the system that could be increasing or decreasing or staying the same. So why do we have inflows and outflows? We have inflows and outflows because we have certain pressures or forces that guide us towards either depleting inventories and having smaller inventories or increasing inventories. So if you think about the water in a container, that level of water, that is our average level of inventory. How is that determined? Should we have this level or a higher level or a lower level? That has to do with the context, the situation, and we're going to talk about the factors that if present will push us towards having low levels of inventory, and other factors that will push us to have high levels of inventory. In any given situation, both types of factors are present. So the balance of them kind of determines the inventory level. What are pressures for small inventories or downward pressures on inventories, pushing us to reduce inventory? Well, cost is a big factor. Inventory costs money to store. That is known as inventory holding cost or carrying cost. Why is this cost there? Well, first of all, it's cost of capital. So if you buy components from a supplier and store them as inventory, you might have paid the supplier. So your money is now tied up as inventory. This money, if it was not in inventory, could have been earning interest at a bank or could have been deployed at alternative uses where it could have earned a return. You're foregoing earning interest on this money or earning return from other uses of the money and choosing to invest this money in inventory. So you have an opportunity cost, basically the cost of your capital. So, if your capital earns 10% a year and instead of earning the 10%, you invest it in inventory. Well, 10% of the money you have invested in inventory is your cost because you foregoed, you gave up on earning that 10% by investing in inventory. There's storage and handling costs, right? So you have to pay for a warehouse or space. It might be temperature controlled. You may have to pay for retail space or warehouse space to store it, things like that. And then you may have to hire workers and equipment to move it around in the space, put it on shelves, offload it, things like that. So these costs are always pushing us to have less inventories because as a manager, you want less cost, because you want higher profitability. Then other pressures for small inventories include insurance, which is another type of cost. If you don't insure the inventory, there could be loss by theft or acts of nature, right? Like floodings, other things like that. There could be shrinkage, which is to do with the amount of inventory you have. Some of it is lost. How? There could be pilferage. Somebody could be stealing it. There's obsolescence. So you bought something and then it expires, like food items expire, medicines expire, or it is a component that is superseded by a newer model. So you bought the older model and now you want to use the newer model of that component and now you cannot use the older model. A deterioration, some things just deteriorate over time. And then there's insurance, which we talked about. Insurance is like a type of cost. And then there could be taxes. Now, this has to do with the tax laws of wherever the inventory is being kept. Okay. It could be positive or negative on how inventory is used. Right. So this is not where you can have one answer. Are taxes going to be a cost or not? I've put them here because sometimes companies will try to decrease inventories because of tax reasons. So it totally depends on the situation, the tax laws, and your accounting of inventory. So this is not something we'll focus on in this course. It has to do with accounting and tax laws, and it's not an accounting course. But what you need to keep in mind is that taxes could go either way depending on how they are calculated. There could be a pressure to have smaller inventories. So it's a potential reason. That's why it's in a different color than the others, but not necessarily a reason or a force pushing you for smaller inventories. Now, what are some pressures for large inventories? What pushes us to have more inventory? Well, customer service is one of the biggest reasons. Why? Because if you have inventory on hand, when you get demand, when customers come and they want to buy something, you have the product available to sell it to them if it's finished goods inventory. If you're talking about components or raw material inventory, then having inventory on hand means you can quickly use that inventory to produce output that the customers want. So if a customer, if you go to Subway and you say, okay, I want, a sub with chicken or something, and the Subway calls a farm 2 hours away and says, hey, can you slaughter a chicken and prepare the meat and give it to me pronto? Well, you might not want to wait that long, right? So if they do not have inventory, their customer service is drastically reduced because the waiting times just go through the roof. And so most businesses want to have some inventory so they can serve the customer in a timely fashion. Also, not to lose customers to competitors, and the customers will go to other alternatives and so forth. So that's a huge reason which pushes us for higher inventories. Ordering cost. Each time you order from a supplier, you may have to pay for transportation. Now, if you're paying for a full truckload to come from the supplier, you might as well order enough to fill up the truckload, or you'll be the transportation will not be economical, for example. Or there's a fixed charge by the bank to pay the supplier. There's some transaction fees, or you have employees that need to be paid just to process the order, the paperwork for the order, and then to file any claims with the supplier if you receive a faulty product. So those employees, they exist just to order. The more orders you have to place, the more time you need from these employees, or more employees you need. And so these are ordering costs associated with placing a lot of orders. If you are producing a component, there's setup cost. You might have to reset your equipment, change over to produce component A, and then you have to change over to produce component B. Because the changeover costs you money and time, you want to do fewer changeovers, which means you want to produce in larger batches. The larger the batches you produce in, the more inventory you will have, so that also leads to pressure for larger inventories. Other pressures are labor and equipment utilization. Sometimes you want to run the factory at capacity, even though the demand might be slightly lower, because you want to utilize expensive equipment and labor, and maybe you want to produce more now to sell in the future. Okay. So if sales are seasonal, right? So if you have a sales increase drastically, so for example, if let's say this is time, right? And let's say you expect your sales to peak, in December, holiday season, you might start producing inventory right here. You might start producing lots of inventory here, do a high level of output to build inventory so you can sell them during December peaks, right? And this, by producing inventory here, you'll be able to maintain a flat or constant output, which can allow you to have full utilization of your facilities, because you're not increasing and decreasing your output. If that point is not clear, don't worry. It's we go into details of this sort of thing when we study sales and operations planning. So if you're more interested about why would this utilization go up, why would you have constant output, things like that, you need to go and study sales and operations planning, also known sometimes called aggregate planning. Economies of scale in transportation can lead to higher inventories, because you want to transport full containers, full truckloads, for example. Payments to suppliers may give you discount to order higher quantities. So you might say, okay, instead of ordering 100, I get a discount if I order 150, so let me just go ahead and order 150. That'll get you the discount, but it'll also lead to higher inventory because you're getting a big batch of products from the supplier. Uncertainty is a big driver of inventory, especially safety stock. Safety stock is buffer inventory you have to provide you to manage the risk based on demand uncertainty, things like that. if demand is volatile and you have lots of buffer inventory, if the demand suddenly spikes, you can still manage that demand because you have inventory on hand. So the higher the uncertainty in a system, it tends to lead. One way to manage that is to have high inventory levels. Another way could be you could just have very flexible production, and you might be able to increase your capacity up and down because you're flexible in terms of what quantity you can produce. That sort of flexibility can sometimes be costly. Inventory might be a cheaper way to handle uncertainty or volatility in demand. Types of inventories. So we can think about inventories by processing stage. So you have raw materials that might come from a supplier. Then you might have work in process inventory, which is you've processed the raw materials, but it's not final. Then you can have finished goods. Then the manufacturer ships the finished good to the distribution center. It's still finished goods in the distribution center, and then it makes its way to the retailer and gets sold as finished goods, right? Now, when you think about this, inventory at different stages, finished goods, work in process, raw materials, we want to think about the independent and dependent demand items. So finished goods have independent demand, meaning demand is influenced by the market conditions and is not related to inventory decisions of other items or inventory decisions of another company. So the demand of the finished goods is determined by customers coming to the retailer and buying the finished goods, right? It's external to this supply chain. It comes from outside the supply chain from the customer. That's independent demand. Based on the demand at the retailer, the demand at other stages works. So the demand for work in process inventory depends on the demand of finished goods inventory. If the demand of the retailer goes up, then we might, the manufacturer might start producing more work in process stuff because they're trying to produce more finished goods, right? And they might buy more raw materials, and the raw material supplier might see their demand go up. So upstream in the supply chain, so work in process inventory, raw materials, the demand for those is dependent on the demand for the finished goods, because the finished goods have demand from the external customer. So the models we're going to study in this lesson apply to independent demand, and so we're mostly just going to assume kind of like finished goods or goods that are being sold to an external customer, right? So that's the scenario we're going to do. Now for dependent items, you basically can do inventory management for finished goods, and then whenever the finished goods inventory is low and you want to reorder, then that reorder generates demand for the dependent items. So their inventory management kind of just depends on the finished goods. And so if you know how to manage finished goods inventory, then you can work back and see how much inventory you need of the other stuff. So we're going to talk about independent demand items, finished goods, in this lesson. Another way to think of inventory is to think of inventory based on the reason we have that inventory. So we can classify inventories based on why they were created. For example, cycle inventory is caused by having batches or lot sizes. Whenever you produce in lots of bigger than 1, so you produce in a lot size of 10, like a batch of 10 or a batch of 100, batch of 500, you're going to have cycle inventory. So whenever batches of material flow through a supply chain, they create cycle inventory at each stage they are stored. Then you have safety stock inventory that is created as a buffer or hedge against uncertainty in the system, uncertainty of demand, uncertainty of supply or lead time, right? So if we have extra inventory just to buffer against those uncertainties, to handle sharp increases in demand, for example, then such inventory will be called safety stock. Anticipation inventory is inventory produced ahead of time, anticipating a peak in demand. So for example, before Valentine's Day, chocolate manufacturers might produce a lot of chocolate in anticipation that they're going to have very high sales on that holiday, right? Meat suppliers might process a lot of turkeys before Thanksgiving, for example, right? Toy manufacturers might produce a lot of toys before the holiday season at the end of the year, things like that, right? And then you might have pipeline inventory, which is just inventory that is in transit. So you've placed an order with the supplier, they've shipped the order, it's in transit, right? So you have invested money in the inventory, but it's moving from one location to the other, and so you cannot work on it or sell it, but you still have money invested in it. That's pipeline inventory. If you walk around physically in a manufacturing plant other than pipeline inventory, which is in transit, you cannot really tell that this piece of item is anticipation inventory or safety stock or cycle inventory, all based on how the item was ordered or produced. You might be able to say that, of this pile of 1,000 pieces, the cycle inventory is like 400 of them, and then the safety stock is 500 of them, and 100 of them are anticipation because we produce them in anticipation of high demand in future or something, right? But you can't identify, they're not tagged, they're not labeled, okay, this is cycle stock, they're all the same. It's just how many were created because of your batch size or lot size, how many were created to hedge against uncertainty in demand, that's your safety stock. So it just depends on why you took the decisions to produce that much inventory. But it's important to know this classification because it helps you understand why you have inventory in the first place. And that is important because somebody might say, well, you have too much inventory, right? How do you justify it? So you say, okay, I need this much just because of the lot size, because this lot size or batch size makes sense. I need this much just to hedge against demand and so forth. So you can use this to justify why you have a certain amount of inventory. Now, cycle inventory. This is the portion of total inventory that varies directly with the lot or batch size. Determining how frequently to order and what quantity to order is called lot sizing. Lot sizing essentially determines how much cycle inventory will be in the system. Let's say the lot size is given by the variable Q. So Q is just a label that holds the quantity that we manufacture something in that batch size or order from the supplier in that batch size. So Q, is a number which is our batch size. Okay. Now, if you're going to order very infrequently, you're going to probably need a larger value of Q, because if you only order once a month, you might need a lot of material to cover everything for the month. If you order once a week, you might need to order less amount per week because you're only ordering for the next week, not the next month, right? So let me see if we have a picture. So when you receive, when inventory is produced or you receive it from a supplier and your lot size is Q, your inventory jumps up by that amount. So if you had 0 at a particular point in time and you received an order of size Q from the supplier, your inventory will jump up to Q, right? It'll jump up to the level Q. Then as you start selling inventory or using it up, your inventory level falls until it hits 0. Sometime before it falls to 0, right, when it hits this threshold, okay, when it hits some threshold, you might say, oh boy, my inventory is really low. I need to place another order with the supplier, or I need to tell the manufacturing people to start producing, more. And so maybe at this time you place the order, right? And then after some time elapses, the order is ready, and then inventory jumps up to Q again, right? So you can see how cycle stock, which is inventory because of a lot or batch size, is just a sawtooth pattern. It goes up, then it gets consumed or sold, then it goes up, right? And the rate of consumption or sales is not always constant. In real life, it looks kind of like this. Oops, that's a bad vertical line. Maybe I can get a little bit straighter vertical line. Okay, so it jumps up by Q, then it kind of irregularly falls down as it's used or consumed, and then it jumps up and then kind of falls down, jumps up, kind of falls down. So you get this, you call the sawtooth pattern with cycle stock. Okay. Okay, so that's cycle stock. Now, if your lot size or batch size is Q, then the average cycle inventory is simply a half of that. Why? Because sometimes it's 0 and sometimes it's Q. So what's the average of 0 and Q? Well, that's 0 plus Q over 2. That's the average of these two numbers, and that's just Q over 2, right? So the average level of cycle inventory in a system is just the lot size or batch size divided by 2. Safety stock is a surplus inventory that protects against uncertainties in demand, lead time, and supply changes. By surplus, we mean it is not kept with the intention of meeting expected customer demand. It's kept with the intention of meeting unexpected demand. So if I expect the demand to be 100 next week, but I know that my expectation may not be reality, actual demand might be more than 100. So I might say, okay, now I'm going to produce 100 at least because I expect to sell 100, but maybe I should produce 20 extra because, demand can be higher than my expectations. So the 20 extra would be your safety stock. Okay. So let's say we have unbiased forecasting. There's a 50% chance, this is not change, this is chance, that actual demand might be larger than the forecast. Keeping inventory in anticipation of larger than expected demand would be safety stock. Safety stock can be created by ordering more than the expected demand or ordering earlier than required. Usually safety stock represents the minimum level of inventory that we always have on hand. When inventory levels approach the minimum level, we place a reorder because we don't want the safety stock to go down to 0. We always want some safety stock present. And so when our inventory falls low, we have just safety stock remaining, we usually order more. And we'll talk about, when to order more, how much to order more. Anticipation inventory, we talked about it earlier, is used to absorb uneven rates of demand or supply that are expected, such as seasonality in demand, such as we know every year as a chocolate manufacturer, we're going to sell a lot at Valentine's, such as every year as a meat supplier, we know we're going to sell a lot of turkeys around Thanksgiving. So it's expected, but there is some event or some time period over which demand just goes up, right? There's a spike in demand. And so we might have to build inventory before the spike in demand. So we have a big pool of stuff ready to be sold during that spike. Right? A lot of retailers, manufacturers build anticipation inventories before Black Friday and Christmas sales. Right. This is different from safety stock because you expect the sales to peak on Black Friday and Christmas sales. Safety stock is for unexpected variation in sales, right? It's just regular day, but every day sales are not the same. Some days you sell more, some days you sell less, type of thing. So that's unexpected variation, right? If you think about the forecasting, we talked about random variation. So even if you have a trend, the trend usually shows up like this. There's random variation around the trend. That random variation is what leads to safety stock. The more the random variation, which is unexpected, we can't forecast it, the more safety stock we need. Anticipation inventory is different. It's in anticipation of certain peaks in demand because of certain events. Pipeline inventory is created when an order for an item is placed but not yet received. So this is inventory that is in the pipeline. Is going to be available in future to sell, and if you've already paid for it, it has to be on our books, so right, because you've invested money in it, but it's not ready. It's on a truck or on a ship somewhere being transported or something like that. It is useful to keep track of this inventory because we may have to pay suppliers in advance or as soon as our items are shipped. So there's some point in time where we have to pay the supplier, and then we might still be transporting the item. Maybe we paid the supplier when the ship left, the port in the supplier's country, but now the ship is going to take 3 weeks to come to the Los Angeles port or the New York port, and then it's going to take 7 days to drive to our warehouse. So all of this time we have money tied up in the inventory. Also, if you have a lot of pipeline inventory, you might want to consider that when placing new orders because, the pipeline inventory is going to be available for sales or use relatively shortly. Okay. Usually, the pipeline inventory is just driven by your average demand level. So let's say your average demand per time period is D bar. This bar on top of certain variables just come from statistics notation. In statistics, they say, okay, X bar is the average value of X. X is some variable, average value of X, right? So X bar, when you see a bar, it just means an average. So your demand, a daily demand or weekly demand is small d, right? And d bar is the average demand. You don't know exactly what demand will be, but you know the average, right? On average, my demand is this much. Now, if your lead time is the time between ordering and receiving an item. So if you are sitting right here, you place an order with your supplier on day 1, right? And here's your supplier, okay? And then the supplier gives you the items and they arrive on day 20. Then your lead time is 20 days because that's how long it took you to get supplies of that particular material. So if your lead time is 20 days and on average each day's demand is D bar, then usually on average your pipeline inventory will be your daily demand times the lead time in days, DL. You know, some days you'll have 0 pipeline inventory, some days you'll have more, some days you'll have less, but on average you'll have, you know, this much stuff in the pipeline. Okay. So this formula just tells you that, you know, what's your pipeline inventory on average. So then you can know how much money is invested in inventory that's in transit, right? Because that's how many units you need. So D bar is in units, right? If you sell 100 units per day or whatever, and then L is in days. So this pipeline inventory D bar times L is in units. So if you know that in the pipeline in transit on average you have 1,000 units, then you know how much money or capital is tied up in the pipeline inventory. Now we're going to get to actually using models to compute how much inventory to have, how much to order, things like that. And the very first model we're going to use is called the economic order quantity. Okay, and that tells us what should be the optimal order quantity to place the order in. This order quantity is your lot size, you know, how much you order from the supplier or from your own manufacturing people, right? You might be sitting in a plant and telling the manufacturing people produce this much. So Q star is called lot size, is called batch size, and is also called order size or quantity. All of these terms, order size / quantity, all of these terms are for this optimal quantity Q that you want to produce in or purchase from a supplier. Okay, so economic order quantity is the optimal lot size that you want. Okay, so we talked about cycle stock already. You know how it gets used up until your inventory levels fall, and then at some point you place a reorder with your supplier, and then as soon as or with your own manufacturing people, you tell them to produce some amount, and then as soon as that order arrives, which is for quantity Q, inventory level jumps up by Q, right? So we already talked about that. Okay, now we're going to look at 2 types of cost, and we're going to try to minimize our total cost because the economic order quantity, EOQ, which is also called Q star, the optimal order quantity, is that quantity which is going to minimize our total cost. Our total cost is composed of 2 types of cost, the holding cost and the ordering or setup cost. Okay, so what is the holding cost? Holding cost increases or decreases based on your average inventory level. So average amount of inventory you have, cycle inventory, times how much it costs you to hold 1 unit of inventory for 1 year. Unit holding cost is dollars per unit per year. So if your unit holding cost is $2, that means you spend $2 to hold 1 unit of inventory for 1 year. It's based on your storage cost, material handling cost, you know, warehousing cost, things like that, right? So if on average you have 100 pieces of inventory, right, and then your unit holding cost is $2 per unit per year, you multiply it by 2, then after a year you would have spent $200 in holding the average inventory level of 100 pieces, right? So it's average cycle inventory times unit holding cost. And if it doesn't, you know, make sense, don't worry, we're going to do the example. The example will make things concrete and clarify things for you. So the ordering cost is the ordering cost has to do with each order. So let's say each time you place an order, it costs you $20. Why? Because the employee that creates the purchase order gets paid, and then there's some transaction fees at the bank, things like that. They add up, and you pay $20 each time you place an order. Right? This is going to be high if you're ordering from a supplier, especially an international supplier. The ordering cost may be very low if you're just telling your if you're just picking up the phone and telling the manufacturing people in the next room to start producing something. In that case, your ordering cost might be zero if you're just ordering people within your own company, but you might have setup costs, because when you call the manufacturing department and say, hey, produce this much of product XYZ, they might have to retool their equipment or schedule workers, things like that. There may be some setup costs because they may be doing something else at the time, right? So if internally within the same company, you often have a setup cost, not an ordering cost. And when you're getting the supplies from outside your company, you often have ordering costs and not a setup cost. So you can have one or the other. Okay, and then the number of orders you place in the whole year. Each time you spend $20. If you place 50 orders in a year, 50 times 20, you spend $1,000. So that will be like your annual ordering cost. So we want to find what should be the order quantity Q that minimizes the total annual cost, which is annual holding cost plus annual ordering cost. Okay. Now, we can compute these costs. So we already know, we already kind of talked about the holding cost. Q over 2 is your average inventory level. You'll see it sometimes referred to as AIL. AIL just means average inventory level. So your cycle inventory on average is Q over 2 times the unit holding cost, H, that is your annual holding cost. Okay. And then S is your ordering or cost per order, or setup cost per setup. And then you have to multiply it by the number of orders. The number of orders in a year is given by D over Q. What is D over Q? How did we get that? D is your annual demand. Okay. So you need to have enough units to meet this annual demand. So over the year, if you add up all of your orders, that quantity should add up to the annual demand, because you have to meet the annual demand. Q is how much you order each time. So if you need 1,000 pieces over a whole year, and each time you order 100, okay, then how many orders will you place? Well, I need 1,000. Each time I order 100, so 1,000 over 100, I'm going to place 10 orders. Right? Makes sense, right? 10 orders. So D over Q gives you how many, the number of orders you place in the whole year, times the cost per order. S will give you the ordering cost. Let me clear up some of this mess. Okay. So that's the formula for the total annual cost, and we want to minimize this cost. Okay. So the good news is that the total cost has a well-defined minimum. And why is that? Because as you vary the lot size or order size, could also be the order size, both are terms for the same thing. As you vary Q, as Q goes up, okay, because your average inventory level is Q over 2, if Q goes up, Q over 2 goes up, so your holding cost goes up. The bigger the Q you have, the more the holding cost you have. The line in red grows. However, the bigger the Q you have, the fewer orders you place per year, right? Because you can place a few large orders if your Q is large, right? So fewer orders means less ordering cost. So as Q goes up, ordering cost decreases. The sum of the red line and the blue line gives us this purple line, which is the total ordering cost, which is nice and U-shaped, so we can find a minimum, and that minimum is the optimal order quantity Q, which minimizes the total cost. If you order more than Q star, if you order, let's say, this quantity QB for Q big, well, your total cost is going to be above the total cost for Q star. And if you order Q small, a quantity less than Q star, again, your total cost will be less than the Q optimal. So because Q optimal is the bottom of this U-shaped curve. Okay. So you don't have to worry about any calculus, anything like that. We just have a simple formula to calculate Q star. and that formula is right here. Q star is also known as economic order quantity, or EOQ, is simply the square root of 2 multiplied by annual demand, capital D. Okay, in this topic, capital D is always annual demand, times the ordering cost S divided by the unit holding cost. Capital H is the unit holding cost. Okay, unit holding cost, and its units are dollars per unit per year. How much money you need to spend to have 1 unit of the item in inventory for a whole year. That's capital H. So you can solve and get Q star, the optimal order quantity, which is also called EOQ, same thing, right? Now, if you have EOQ, what is the time between successive orders on average? Okay, well, the time between orders, TBO, is going to be EOQ divided by annual demand, and that's in years. If you don't multiply by 12, EOQ over D gives you the time between order in years, and that's going to be a fraction, because EOQ is, always smaller than D, the annual demand. So if annual demand is 1,000, okay, and my EOQ is 50, then EOQ over the annual demand is going to give me something like 1 over 20. So that's 1 over 20th of a year. So you can multiply it by 12 months in a year to convert it to months. You might get, okay, that is, 12 over 20 months. That's a little bit over half a month. So every half a month and few days, like every 2.5 weeks or so, you will be placing another order, right? Now you can multiply it, if you want to convert it from years into days, you can multiply by 365. So EOQ over the annual demand multiplied by 365 will give you time between orders in days. Okay, how many days are between the orders? If you multiply by 12, you get time between order in months. If you multiply by 52, because there are 52 weeks per year, so if you multiply, instead of the 12, you multiply by 52, you would get the time between orders in weeks. Right? How many weeks are there on average between 2 orders that you need to place? Okay, let's do an example. Let's make this all concrete. A museum of natural history opened a gift shop. Okay, it operates 52 weeks per year. The top selling SKU is a bird feeder. Maybe the museum, has lots of birds. Maybe some natural museum about birds or something, right? So people get excited about birds. They want to buy a bird feeder, right? So they go to this gift shop and they buy bird feeders. We sell about 18 units per week, right? Because a lot of people have cats that'll just eat up the birds, so they can't buy the bird feeders, or sales are not as high as we would like. But, they're decent. 18 units per week we sell, okay? And we buy these from a supplier or a producer of these, bird feeders, and we pay them $60 per unit. Ordering cost is $45, okay? That means each time we place the order with the supplier to get, some quantity of these bird feeders, we have to spend $45. Annual holding cost is 25% of the feeder's value. So this is very interesting. In the EOQ formula, we need capital H, which is unit holding cost. We need that, otherwise we can't compute the EOQ value, unit holding cost. And the units of this are dollars per unit per year. Now, capital H is often computed by a formula, which I haven't shown you. I'm going to show you right now. It's often computed by a formula with just called small h multiplied by C. C is the cost of the item we pay the supplier. So in this case, C is 60 units. Small h is a percentage, because when you invest money into inventory, your holding cost is often a percentage of the item's value. If you're going to store an iPhone in inventory for a year and that iPhone costs $500, you're going to spend more dollars to hold an iPhone in inventory than you're going to spend to hold a bird feeder in inventory, which costs $60, because cheaper things cost less to have, because you invest less money in their inventory, and expensive things cost a lot more to have for a year because you spend a lot of money in them, right? And so because capital H is a function of the item's value, or the cost we pay for it, C, the questions will give you a percentage of the C. So we're going to multiply 25%, which is 25 over 100, right, or 0.25, times $60. Okay, that's going to give us about, I think, $15. So our unit holding cost H equals $15 per unit per year, right? So our unit holding cost is going to be $15 per unit per year, and we got it by multiplying the percentage holding cost by the item's value. Okay, and so what it means is if you hold a bird feeder in stock for a whole year and you don't sell it for a whole year, it's in your inventory for a whole year, you end up spending $15 to hold it in inventory for a whole year. Management has chosen to order in lot sizes of 390. Okay, what is the annual cycle inventory cost of the current policy, and then would 468 be better? And then we calculate the EOQ and find out the optimal lot size, because management may not be right, they may not be at the optimal value. Let's solve this problem. Okay, so first of all, we need the annual demand D. We know we sell 18 units per week and we are open for 52 weeks a year. So 18 multiplied by 52 gives us 936 units per year. So that's our annual demand D. Capital H, or unit holding cost, is simply the percentage holding cost times the value of the unit. So 25% or 0.25 times $60 or $15. Okay. Now we can calculate the total annual cycle inventory cost for the current policy. Why? Because we know annual demand D, 936, just computed it. We know H, unit holding cost, $15, just computed it, right? So 1, that's 1 right here, and then 2H, we know 2 here, and then Q is your lot size, which the question told us the management's lot size is 390. So we know Q. Q is simply because management, I don't know, they pull it out of a hat or something, but somehow they want 390. Maybe it fills up the truck or whatever reason they have, right? And then we need S, the ordering cost, which the question also tells us is $45, right? So we have all the numbers to compute the annual cost of this inventory policy, which is order 390 units of that bird feeder from the supplier each time you run low on inventory. That's our policy, right? So what's the cost of this policy? So we do 390, which is Q, over 2 times 15. This whole thing is my inventory holding cost. Plus, my ordering cost is D over Q. This is how many orders I'll place in the year, 936 over 390, which is about less than 3 orders, like some 2 point something orders, less than 3 orders, right? And times the cost per order, 45. And so my total cost is I spent $2,925 on holding inventory and only $108 on ordering inventory for a total cost of $3,033. Now notice my annual holding cost, okay, is not equal to my annual ordering cost. Annual ordering cost, in fact, is much higher, right? So this is my annual ordering cost, this is my annual holding cost. So holding cost is much higher. If you go back to this nice picture, and let me clear up the ink on the slide. So what I want to show you is at the optimal point, Q star, what is true? The blue line and the red line are equal. So at the optimal quantity, at the optimal lot size, your annual, ANN for annual ordering cost, okay, is equal to your annual holding cost. Whenever these costs are not equal, you're not on the optimal Q star. Remember, our holding cost was much larger, so we were ordering the 390 is somewhere here. We're ordering Q big, we're ordering too much because the holding cost is higher than the ordering cost. If we reduce the lot size from 390, we would get to the optimal lot size. Okay, so that is what we had. So our total cost for the current policy is 33233. Okay. Now management is considering another lot size. They're thinking, should we order 468, right? That is also not a very good idea because, you know, that is going to increase our annual cost. We were already paying $3,033 for this policy, and the new policy with a bigger ordering size is going to increase our cost to $3,600. Not a good idea. So let's look at what is the optimal batch size, right? So our boss is in a pickle. They used to order 390 and somebody's telling them it's not the right quantity because of the high cost, and they went to 468 and it's still not the right quantity. They're like, what do I do, right? So let's help them out. So we're going to order find the optimal order quantity Q star, also known as EOQ, which is square root of 2ds over h. 2 is just 2, and the annual demand is 936. We commuted earlier up here, so remember 936 is annual demand. So we plug that in. S is the cost per order, so we spend $45 each time we place an order, and then the unit holding cost is $15, which we computed up here, right? So we plug those in, plug and chug. So you multiply the three numbers at the top, divide by 15, take a square root, and we get 74.94, which is basically 75 units. So we should be ordering in batches of 75, and we were ordering 390 and then 468. We were way off. So Mr. Manager or Miss Manager, please order less at a time. Only order 75 of these bird feeders at a time, right? So what would be the cost of the new policy if we do order only 75? Are we saving any money? And so we can calculate the cost by using the same cost formula that we've been looking at. This cost formula right here, C equals Q over 2 times H plus D over Q times S. So when we plug and chug these numbers, we get an annual cost of $1,124, much less than the $3,033 we had with a batch size of 390 or with a batch size of 468, the $3,600 we have. So we are going to be saving some money, and then, maybe we can invest it or do something else with it, take a bigger bonus home, right? And notice how close our annual holding cost, right? Annual holding cost and the annual ordering cost are. And remember I said when you're at the optimal quantity, these costs are equal. Well, why are they not equal? Why is it 0.5 and 0.6? Because I'm using 75. My optimal quantity is 74.94. If I use 74.94 here, I would get these two values to be exactly equal. Right? I rounded up to 75, so a slight difference here. So you can see that when you are at the optimal lot size, your annual ordering cost and annual holding costs are equal, and the sum of the two is your total cost per year. Okay. So let's clear this up, and you can see me, point out the same thing here with this note. So what is the time between orders? If I order, 75 each time, and my annual demand is 936, well, 75 over 936 is 0.08. This is in years, right? Because EOQ over D is demand per year, EOQ is just units, D is units per year, so the EOQ over D is in years, so 0.08 years. We can then multiply by 12 months in a year to convert it into months or whatever units we want. So if you want the time between orders in months, just take the 0.08 that you got here, multiply it by 12, and you get 0.96 months. So approximately once a month we're going to be ordering. You can convert it into weeks by multiplying the 0.08 years by 52 weeks per year, and you get 4.17 weeks, which is about a month. You can convert it into days, 29.25 days. So time between orders is useful to know because you know that approximately this many days or this many weeks you have to place an order with the supplier. Right, and so you can convert the EOQ over D. Remember that always gives you in years, right? In years, and then you can convert this into months or weeks or days by multiplying by 12 or 52 or 365 or whatever quantity you want, whatever units of the time you want the time between orders in. So the question might ask you, what is the time between order in weeks? Then you'll use this, right? If it asks you what is the time between order in days, you'll use this. If it asks you what is the time between orders in months, you'll use this. And if the question asks you what is the time between orders in years, you'll just use this. Okay. So we want to understand what happens if different things change to our optimal order quantity Q star. Okay, let's talk about demand. Demand in the formula is this right here, D. It's in the numerator. So if demand goes up, your Q star or your EOQ quantity, which is Q star, your optimal lot size would go up. So if you see demand for your products going up, then you're going to have to order in larger lots from the supplier. Okay. if you are able to reduce the ordering cost or setup cost, if you're able to reduce S is proportional to the order quantity Q star, because it's in the numerator. So if S goes down, your lot size will go down, because you'll not worry about placing lots of small orders, because the order doesn't cost you that much. So if you reduce S, you can have lower lot size. Lower lot size might be desirable, because if Q star is lower, it falls, your average inventory level Q over 2 is going to fall, right? And so you'll have less inventory, so you need less space to store it and things like that. So if you want less inventory, this is all about cycle stock, because we're just talking about the lot size. We're not talking about safety stock or other types of inventory, right? Just a cycle stock discussion going on. So if you want less cycle stock, well, if you reduce your ordering cost, then you'll have a smaller ordering quantity, Q star or EOQ. Okay. Holding cost. If you are able to reduce the holding cost, then your optimal lot size will go up, because holding inventory doesn't cost as much, so you're indifferent to holding a lot of inventory. So if your inventory costs go down or holding costs go down, then your lot size would go up. Conversely, if your inventory holding costs go up, maybe the rent on the warehouse went up, things like that, then your lot size would decrease. Your Q star or EOQ quantity would go down, because now it's expensive to hold inventory. Okay, so it's important to understand, if these parameters change, what is the change on EOQ, or the optimal lot size. There's some assumptions to this calculation. There are no constraints on the size of the lot. The lot could be as small or large as possible. In real life, we may have some transportation constraints, so the lot can't be less than this, because it's not feasible to transport, not more than this. And so then you might want to round it up or down, appropriately based on the transportation constraints. But we have assumed no constraints on the lot size. Okay. We have assumed that the relevant costs are the inventory holding cost and the fixed ordering or setup cost. If there is some other relevant cost which changes with the Q, the order quantity, then you would want to consider it. But this is not a very strong. I mean, this is a reasonable assumption. Most of the costs you can either assign them as changing, with the number of orders, or changing with the ordering quantity. Costs which change with the ordered quantity Q are holding costs, and costs which change with the number of orders placed are ordering costs. And we can make decisions for just an item without worrying about other items, because you're going to compute EOQ for a particular SKU, a particular product you sell, or a component you need, things like that. Sometimes things are related in a way that if that supplier also supplies another component, and if you're ordering component A, you might as well order component B, because you can ship them together or something. So if there are dependencies like that, then the EOQ is not handling those dependencies. The textbook gives you another two assumptions, that the lead time is constant and demand rate is constant. These are not really assumptions, because you can just work with average lead time and average demand rate, and still the EOQ would work reasonably well. Why? Because the total cost curve that you're trying to minimize in EOQ, remember that U-shaped curve we had, and we went to the minimum point and we said that's Q star. Well, this curve is pretty flat around Q star. So, you need to be approximately in the low cost area. You don't need to get Q star, very precisely correct. So even if you don't know demand exactly, you just have some average demand number, you can use it to calculate EOQ. So these two assumptions are never true in real life, and they don't need to be true. You can still use EOQ. These are more of the, the limitations of the model 1, 2, and 3 that you should be aware of. So the last two assumptions can easily be discarded by having safety stock to hedge against demand and lead time uncertainty. So they do not restrict the use of EOQ, because in addition to EOQ, you can do a safety stock calculation that we'll talk about in the next part of the lecture on how to calculate safety stock and how to build that into your model. So that's separate from EOQ. And once you have that, you don't worry about demand and lead time uncertainty. So these two assumptions can be discarded. Okay. Also, if you find an approximate optimal quantity in real life, because maybe you don't know the value of something precisely, like H holding cost, you don't know it precisely, you can just go with an estimate, because you only want to be approximately correct, and that's often good enough. Why? Because the total cost curve is pretty flat around Q star. So if you end up a little bit higher or a little bit lower because of your wrong estimate, that's totally fine. Your total cost is not going to be that much different, right? But if you end up far away from the optimal quantity, then your total cost could be very, very different. So you could be wasting a lot of money. So you have to be close to the optimal value. In real life, you may not need to be exactly at the real value. Obviously, on an exam, you can't use this logic. You can't tell me that the EOQ was 75 and you put in 61 as the answer, and you want me to grade it correctly because the cost curve is flat and 61 is close enough to 75. Wouldn't work on the exam. On the exam, I want you to calculate the exact EOQ value, right? But in real life, being close enough might be good enough. Okay. If you have a make-to-order strategy, you're doing custom orders, okay? Custom orders for the customer, okay? You producing custom goods, right? Let's say you're producing custom furniture, right? So you're not going to produce the furniture in Q star quantities because you cannot produce it before you know the demand. The customer has to come in, customize the furniture, place the order, and then you're going to place it in the quantity the customer ordered. So there's no point in using EOQ to figure out the ordering quantity because the customer tells you what order he or she wants because they give you the order quantity when they customize the order. So in make to order, the production happens after getting the customer order. So there's no point in using EOQ. Order size is constrained due to so make to order strategy, right? You don't use EOQ. Another. So that's number one. So another place we don't use EOQ. Another place we don't use EOQ. So that's number one. Number two is if we have limitations on the order size, we calculate EOQ, right? But we cannot produce that much. We have some physical constraint or other issues, so we cannot produce that much. So in that case, you can calculate the EOQ, then round it down, round it up, based on your capacity or other quantity constraints you might have. So whatever constraints you have, you need to round it up or down. So you can't just use the raw value of EOQ. Okay. If you have quantity discount, so you save money by ordering larger quantities from a supplier, then you need to use a modified EOQ formula, okay? So the EOQ formula, we covered the basic one, you'll not use that. There are a lot of modifications on EOQ, so if you know the basic formula, there are extensions of that to handle different situations, and quantity discount is one such popular extension, and you can just, use that extended formula to do that, but the normal formula will not work without modification when there are quantity discounts. The other situation where you have to modify the EOQ is if you get the quantity that you order over time. So let's say you tell the supplier, give me 200 pieces, and the supplier gives you 10 pieces a day for 20 days until you get 200 pieces. So you never got a batch of 200 pieces in one go, you just got 10 pieces a day over 20 days. In that case, you can also use a modified EOQ formula. You can't use the basic EOQ that we covered in this lesson. Okay, so these modifications are pretty straightforward. You can find the formulas in the Krajewski-Malhotra, operations management textbook. Right here, the formulas are given in the supplement C. These formulas for these two situations are given there. If you're doing make-to-stock strategy with relatively stable demand, or even with uncertain demand, as long as you know what the average demand will be, you can use EOQ. Carrying and setup costs are known. Obviously, you need to know these costs to calculate EOQ, but these are usually known. If you don't know them, go to your accountant, and they would help you figure out these costs. So EOQ is a very powerful tool. It can help you get to the optimal lot size in production situations where you have setup cost, or in ordering situations where you're ordering from a supplier and you have ordering cost. In both these situations, you can use EOQ. S, the ordering cost, can be an ordering cost if you're ordering from an external supplier, or S can be a setup cost if you are producing in-house and you have to do a setup for the production of that product or component. That is it for this part of the lesson on inventory management.